Welcome back to another riveting episode of In the Chute. That's where I'm sitting here like the dummy, waiting for a fast action question, and Calen's going to try to stump me. What do you got, Calen?
Live action. Uh, Cost and required maintenance of horses. We raise gated horses. For anybody unfamiliar with our channel, we raise gated horses. That should not be a surprise to anybody that's followed us for a while, but we also deal with a lot of non-gated horses when we have clients ask for trainings. So we've worked not only with gated but also non-gated. There's really no discretion or anything like that, or hate towards one type of horse or another. So we deal with all of them. The question is, ultimately it all comes down to, taking care of the animals and maintaining, health, welfare, and then also the stuff that goes with them: saddles, halters, um stuff, anything that can possibly go with it. Your annual or biannual worming, anything that might happen, doctoring, stuff like that. What are consistent costs and required maintenance things, like the things that you'll have to do on a daily or weekly or monthly or yearly basis? And then what are some of those things that are unexpected and some of the costs that can come from that? I know that can be a big subject, but we got
Yeah,
14 minutes.
there's a ton there. It depends on how much you're messing with them. I mean, if you've
Yeah.
got some of your older brood mares, or like your gelding doesn't get touched much,
No.
except vaccinations in the spring. And then we'll worm them 2, 3 times a year because they're out on pasture. So their worming regime is not super strict because they're not just in a corral somewhere in
Right.
confinement. So you're rotating your type of wormer, keeping track of that in the fall, late after a hard freeze. Then we're gonna do a wormer with a boticide in it. Then in the spring, sometimes I'll hit them with something for the tapeworm elimination. You're just maintaining and maintenance on your parasites. Same thing with some of your flies. We try to minimize that as much as you can, but there's not a lot you can do on a pastured horse. You'll see them standing butt to tail, a couple of them buddied up, and they're swatting flies for each other with the other one's tail. But um, if you're working a horse consistently, or working a horse at all, you've got daily feed. You're hand feeding them oftentimes, and certainly watching them. All horses get the worming and the vaccinations. Um, then some are out on pasture in the wintertime. You're feeding them. You're just watching them, see how much they eat, what they consume, and keeping hay in front of them. It's pretty simple. It's not rocket science there. It's managing the horse that you're working a lot. How stressed are they when in their training? You might have to supplement them a little bit if they're losing a little weight, getting too much exercise or a lot of exercise on top of um, the stress of training. They may be losing teeth of an age where they're 3 years old and they're starting to lose some teeth. So you got to be careful with them then. You got to not overwork them and make sure they get plenty of nutrition. Um, Older horses, as a horse needed teeth floating. I mean, there's all kinds of things. Horses can be a dang sure money pit, even if you get one that's a bad one, or something that takes a lot of maintenance. Your hoof care, foot care, we do all that our own, and so it's labor intensive, but it's cheap labor because it's us.
Well, and I'm
You
thinking a lot like, I like to play golf, and I like to think of like horses almost like getting into golf. So if you've never played golf before, there's a lot of overhead maintenance and getting all the clubs, the right attire, because some places, the proper dress attire to be able to come onto the course. There's a lot of overhead in a sense with a horse. You got saddles, halters, bridles, stuff. Have maybe a small first aid kit if you're not like us. We have actually a pretty decent size aid kit, but if somebody's got one or two horses, maybe something small, have some antibiotics on hand, like all these things, these miscellaneous things to start out. And
know,
then from there, you're like, okay, now I can have a horse. And
right?
then at that point, you might buy a horse, every 20 years or so, but there's a lot of stuff to start out in a sense. And then, there's the consistent fees that come on, regular vet checks, like
Yeah,
you're saying, the checking their teeth and, maybe giving them some warmer. Maybe something happens and they need delousing, or they need, significant amount of farrier work or regular farrier. Like, it's just, things happen.
It seems to
It's
never
a lot.
quit. Yeah.
You're right.
When you get a bunch of horses together and somebody's going to get cut.
Yeah.
I mean, they're banged up. I mean, it just happens. But no, those are all things that you know are expensive and they're tough to get into. It was like a story about the guy that his buddy felt bad for him, so he gave him a horse after a bad breakup. Next thing you know, he's got a pickup and a little bit of tiny little trailer and going around doing things. And he meets this girl and it's like, man, she's pretty nice. Pretty soon they start getting serious, and so he buys her a horse. Well, then they had to get a bigger horse trailer. Then they had to get a pickup to do that. And they got married, and they get all of this stuff in this house and this barn, and she leaves him for the trainer, and wipes him out. So his buddy felt bad for him, and he bought him a horse. So the whole thing starts all over, right? I mean, it can just get out of hand. It you don't have to have splint boots, and you don't have to have, you know, blankets for them and cooling or warming and you name it. I mean, wraps and gimmicks of every shape and size. I mean, there's always going to be somebody who's got something to sell you when it comes to horse gear, horse apparel. So there's some times when things are needed, and it can sure help to prevent injury. When they're bell boots and shins, knee splints or leg splints when they're barrel racing or in a trailer or you know all kinds of protective stuff, but isn't necessarily needed. So um, yeah, your basic horse bridle, saddle, blanket, and you're good to go. But all of that's expensive.
What would you say is probably the most consistent cost for horses overall? And I'm not saying, like the startup stuff, like, hey, I need to go buy a new saddle. I need to go
Right.
buy a new what is the consistent thing that you're shelling out on a regular basis for horses to maintain their health and welfare?
That's going to be your feed,
Yeah.
right? I mean, wintertime, you've got one type of feed because we've got pasture all these horses. And I can get some grass hay in a big round bale. I can shake a bale out for them or a big square. Then I need another type of hay. Um, Roughly, you want it the same type, but put up differently in small squares sometimes for in the corral application. So you're always managing your hay as well and making sure they got some good grass hay, and then being able to feed it out easily or not so easily, depending on where you're at.
Yeah, and I would, being the expert feeder of the family, I was the one that fed. Braden did the water. I would say do square bales, not round bales, because they will just tear the round bales up and there'll be hay all over the place, and then it's not used efficiently whatsoever. But
Well, if you're out, but if you got a bunch of horses that are out in a
right.
pasture, you do it, and you don't just put it out in a big long string. You kind of put it out in different spots so they don't fight over it. And yeah, there's a few things
Yeah.
you can do like that.
One or two horses versus a significant herd of
Right,
horses.
right.
uh with that, that's the maintaining a horse, the initial cost of horses. Man, they're expensive. If you're
They're
not into
not cheap.
horses, just stay away from them.
That's yeah, you're cheaper and better off golfing.
Yeah, for sure. With that, we'll take this conversation, put it out to pasture.